I saw her before I even knew I had been waiting. She entered the boutique without hesitation, the glass door swinging inward as if sensing her presence. There was no pause, no glance around to take in the surroundings. She moved with the certainty of someone used to being obeyed. Every step was measured, deliberate, confident in the way that only power can produce. She was wrapped in layers of luxury, cashmere, silk, leather, but none of it looked heavy. Instead, it clung to her like second skin, framing her like a portrait painted in expensive oils. I noticed her perfume before I noticed her face, something smoky and floral, something that didn't belong to this world of floral displays and sales racks. She didn't look at the mannequins. She didn't look at the clothes. She looked at me. And when she did, it wasn't curiosity or interest I saw. It was possession. Like she had walked in knowing exactly what she would find, and I was part of the inventory. I stood behind the register, hands suddenly too stiff, trying to remember how to breathe while she walked in a slow circle around the showroom. When she turned, the movement of her coat revealed a glimpse of her dress, pale gray silk with a jagged tear near the hem, barely noticeable. But to me, it was a flaw in perfection, a crack in the marble. And somehow, that imperfection made her even more terrifying, more beautiful. She came straight to me, close enough that I could see the sharp lines at the corners of her eyes, the hint of a scar running along the curve of her upper lip. It wasn't the kind of scar that told a story, it was the kind that silenced them. I felt as if I'd been spoken to without a single word, and then she said my name. Not excuse me or miss, my actual name. I wasn't wearing a name tag. My name wasn't printed anywhere near me. But she said it with the ease of someone flipping open a well-memorized book. My spine stiffened. I nodded. I smiled. I asked if I could help her, but I already knew the answer. From that moment on, she became a regular, though regular feels like the wrong word for someone like her. She didn't come often and never with consistency, but when she did, it was always with purpose. She would request pieces that hadn't yet hit the floor, whisper the names of designers I had only read about in glossy magazines, and examine clothing as if judging the integrity of their threads with her eyes alone. She never tried anything on in the store, never looked in a mirror. Instead, she asked me to describe the way the fabric moved. She asked me what I thought of the cuts, the hems, the weight of the draping. I spoke more in those moments than I did in days. And always, she watched me. Not in the way clients usually do, scanning for approval or reading body language. No, she studied me, like she was trying to understand the structure of me. And with each visit, her gaze grew heavier and my own breath lighter. I began to anticipate her presence. I started wearing lipstick on her days. I changed the perfume I wore. I ironed my shirts twice. I kept my hair tied back so she could see my neck. Once, she asked me to bring her a pair of leather gloves we didn't stock. I told her we didn't carry that brand. She didn't argue. She just looked at me and then gave me a card with a number. "Call this," she said. "They'll deliver them here tomorrow." I didn't ask how. I just did as she asked. The gloves arrived wrapped in tissue and ribbon, sealed in a black box that felt heavier than its contents. She returned 3 days later, tried them on, and then, without saying anything, placed the gloves in my hands and left. I stood there with the box pressed against my chest, the scent of her skin still lingering on the leather. There was something about her that made me forget the boundaries between service and submission. I stopped seeing her as a client. I stopped seeing myself as an employee. In the quiet spaces between her instructions, something else took root, something strange, something dangerous. She was elegant, unreachable, carved from another world, but every time she looked at me, I felt like I had been pulled into that world without permission. I remember one evening when she stayed long past closing. The other employees had gone and the lights were dimmed. She asked me to walk with her through the store, aisle by aisle, pointing out what I would choose for myself. I did, nervously. She said nothing, only nodded occasionally, sometimes leaning in to touch a fabric or stroke a hem. When we reached a particular silk dress, champagne-colored, backless, scandalous in its simplicity, she brushed her fingers along the edge. "This one," she said. I assumed she meant for herself, but then she said it again, softer, and I realized she meant it for me. She didn't ask if I wanted it. She didn't offer to buy it. She simply took it from the rack, handed it to me, and told me to meet her outside the next evening. Her voice left no space for questions, and I agreed. Not because I was curious, not because I wanted a gift, but because something in her voice made me feel like the girl I had been before her had already disappeared. I didn't know what she wanted. I didn't know why she chose me. But as I stood in the changing room later that night, holding that silk dress to my chest, I noticed something strange. At the bottom hem, almost hidden in the folds, was a single thread stitched in red, and when I pulled it, it revealed a tiny flaw, a line, a tear, a scar on the silk, just like her. The next evening arrived with a hush, as if the world itself had dimmed its lights in anticipation. I stood outside the address she had given me, clutching the silk dress in its garment bag, trying to steady my breathing. It wasn't a store I knew, though the name on the brass plaque above the doorway suggested exclusivity, something private and utterly inaccessible to anyone who wasn't already part of its design. The windows were tall but veiled, covered from the inside by rich fabric that let no light escape. From the outside, it looked abandoned until the door opened before I even reached it, and a man in black simply stepped aside to let me in. Inside, it was silent, the kind of silence that absorbs footsteps, that drinks in breath. The air was cool, the lighting low and golden, diffused across displays of garments too elegant to be touched by casual hands. The boutique was empty, save for a woman standing at the far end with her back to me. Her silhouette was unmistakable, the way she held herself, as if the room curved around her spine. She turned as I approached and looked at the dress I carried without reaching for it. Instead, she motioned for me to follow. We moved through a series of private rooms, each more decadent than the last. Racks of designer pieces stood like sculptures behind glass, shoes lined up with mathematical precision, jewelry displayed as though it were relics. I walked behind her, every sound in the space muffled, intimate. Her heels tapped softly against the dark wood floor, echoing in my rib cage. I couldn't tell if she was leading me to a dressing room or an altar. In the final room, the lights were warmer, almost amber. A low chaise stood near the center, surrounded by mirrors, none of them facing the same direction. She took the dress from me, unzipping the bag with a deliberate slowness that made my skin prickle. She held it up, examined it briefly, and then handed it back. I didn't know what she wanted me to do, but she didn't need to say it. I stepped behind the curtain and began to undress. The fabric of the silk dress clung to me as I slid it on, whispering over my skin like water slipping down glass. The hem brushed my thighs like fingertips. I adjusted the straps, tried to breathe. When I stepped out, she was seated on the chaise, one leg crossed over the other, watching. Her gaze moved down my body in a way that was both assessment and devotion. She didn't speak, didn't gesture, but her eyes gave the command. I walked toward her, knees weakening with every step. The mirrors caught my reflection at angles I had never seen myself, fragmented, repeating, layered. My body in motion, my skin flushed, my breath shallow. When I reached her, she uncrossed her legs and stood, her body just inches from mine. Her fingers reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my shoulder. The touch was feather-light, but it set my entire body alight. She circled me slowly, never speaking, her hand occasionally grazing fabric, hip, waist. Each contact was like a flicker of flame, precise and intentional. When she came to a stop behind me, I felt her breath on the back of my neck. I closed my eyes. Her fingers slipped beneath the strap of the dress and tugged it gently down my shoulder. The silk loosened, sliding lower. Her hand pressed flat between my shoulder blades, guiding me forward, closer to the mirror. I looked at myself, at us, her presence behind me like a shadow made flesh. Her face calm, impassive, focused entirely on the point where her fingers met my skin. The strap slipped further, then the other. The dress fell slowly, pooling around my feet in a silent sigh. I stood there in nothing but lace, bare legs and goosebumps, her gaze traveling the full length of me in the mirror's reflection. She didn't touch me immediately. She let me feel the moment stretch, taut and trembling. When her hands did land, it was on my hips, firm, grounding. She pulled me back slightly, aligning my body with hers. Her mouth brushed my shoulder. Not a kiss, more of a taste. She traced her lips along my skin, exhaling warmth. One hand slid up, across my ribs, beneath the lace. The other dipped lower, over the curve of my thigh. Her touch was slow, exploratory, reverent. She guided me to the chaise, never speaking, never rushing. The mirror caught everything. The way my body responded, the arch of my back as she pushed me down, her hands moving like they had memorized every inch of me. I felt myself melting under her fingers, bending without resistance. She knelt between my knees, her eyes still fixed on the mirror, watching both of us. Her hands traced paths down my thighs, parting them with the ease of someone who knew I would let her. Her mouth followed. I gasped, head falling back, fingers digging into velvet. The pressure of her tongue, the way she alternated speed, rhythm, intention, it was methodical and devastating. She took her time, made a ritual of it. She didn't want me to finish quickly. She wanted me to unravel, and I did. Every breath left me trembling. Every sound I made echoed in the mirrored walls, a symphony of surrender. When I finally reached the edge, when my body tensed and broke around her, she held me through it, her hands never leaving my skin. I opened my eyes and saw myself in the glass, flushed, disheveled, stripped of pretense, and I saw her behind me, proud and quiet, her lips swollen, her expression unreadable. She stood and helped me dress, pulling the straps back into place with practiced grace. I couldn't meet her eyes, not because of shame, but because I knew she had taken something, not just my body, something deeper, something that wouldn't be given back. She walked me to the door without a word. The boutique was still empty, the night still waiting outside like a witness. As I stepped through the doorway, the air felt different, thinner, more fragile. I looked back once, but the door had already closed behind me. On the sidewalk, the city pulsed and blinked as if nothing had happened. But I walked away barefoot, my heels dangling from one hand, silk brushing my thighs like a secret. I could still feel her mouth on me, still feel her fingers, still hear the silence between us, louder than anything I had ever known. She became a constant I never expected. Not daily, not predictable, but ever present in my thoughts. I never knew when she would appear. No texts, no calls, just a sleek black car waiting outside the store at closing, or an envelope slipped under the boutique door with nothing but an address and a time in that unmistakable, sharp handwriting. And I always went, without hesitation, without question. My life between her visits began to feel gray, colorless, flattened. I waited for her like one waits for a storm, half in dread, half in desperate longing. Each time we met, the location was different. Sometimes it was a hotel suite, so high up the windows looked down on the city like gods surveying mortals. Other times, it was an apartment I hadn't seen before, always staged, never lived in, scented with expensive candles and chilled wine. But the most frequent setting was the mirrored room, hidden within a building I never fully recognized, tucked behind a lobby that never had the same receptionist twice. The room itself was always the same. Warm light, plush furniture, soft music humming from nowhere, and mirrors. So many mirrors, on the walls, the ceiling, sometimes even on the floor beneath a glass platform. Each angled differently, fragmenting reality into shards of movement and flesh. She rarely spoke in those spaces. Her eyes did the speaking, her hands the punctuation. The silence became a language we both understood, more intimate than words could ever be. She would undress me like I was made of threads she intended to pull loose, one by one. There was never urgency in her touch, only precision. Her fingers were slow, clinical, reverent. She undressed me like she was undoing herself. I remember the first time she brought out the silk ribbons. She held them in her palms like offerings, pale gray, cool to the touch, impossibly soft. She motioned for me to turn, and I obeyed. She bound my wrists loosely behind my back, not to restrain, but to heighten. My breath became shallow the moment the knot was tightened. I felt exposed, defenseless, standing in the middle of that mirrored room with nothing between me and my reflection but her gaze. She walked around me slowly, her fingertips brushing skin, tracing bone, her breath sometimes close enough to make my knees weaken. I could feel her eyes traveling across the many versions of me, reflected back from every direction, as if trying to find the one I hadn't hidden. She pressed her palm against my chest, flat and firm, right over my heart. Then she pushed. I stepped back instinctively, the silk dragging against my skin, my breath catching as the back of my knees touched the edge of the chase. I sat without being told. She knelt in front of me, spreading my knees apart, her movements deliberate. Her eyes never left mine in the mirror, not even as her hands slid up my thighs, thumbs pressing gently into the hollows of my inner legs. I could feel the blood rushing under my skin, my pulse pounding everywhere at once. She kissed the inside of my knee first, then higher, her mouth hot and slow and unrelenting. The ribbons behind my back shifted with every twitch, every subtle jerk of my body in response. I felt suspended, hovering between control and surrender, between reality and something far more primal. Her tongue moved with devastating focus, her fingers anchoring me in place, her breath heating every inch of me she touched. I could see it all, my body taut and open, trembling, her head buried between my thighs, her eyes still watching me, forcing me to witness what I had become. When I came, it wasn't a crash, but a slow collapse, a silent implosion. My body trembled, legs shaking, breath uneven. She didn't stop. She held me there, soft kisses pressed into my hip bones, her hand stroking my thigh in lazy, possessive circles. When she finally untied the ribbons, she didn't let my arms fall. She guided them gently to my sides, brushing her fingers along the lines the silk had left on my skin, like she was tracing the borders of something sacred. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My silence felt loud in that room, bouncing off the mirrors like confessions. I lay back, spent, her body curled beside me, her fingers absent-mindedly playing with my hair. She didn't ask questions. She never did. But in her quiet way, she peeled away pieces of me I hadn't even known were there to give. The mirrors never lied. They showed me everything. The curve of my spine as I bent for her, the flush in my cheeks as she pressed her mouth against mine, tasting me on my own lips, the subtle arch of my back as she pushed inside me with fingers that moved like they belonged there. Every reflection was a record, a proof, a reminder that I wasn't the same. I was changing, and she saw it. She wanted it. Sometimes she would photograph me, not with a phone, with a small silver camera that clicked softly as she circled me, captured me, froze me in frames I would never see. She never showed me the images. I never asked, but I could feel their weight long after the shutter had gone silent. I imagined those photographs hung somewhere private, curated like a collection of quiet ruin. I began to look for my own reflection in every surface I passed, searching for confirmation that I still existed outside of her gaze. But nothing ever looked the same. I looked older, rawer, sharper. I carried something in my eyes I couldn't name. My colleagues began to notice the change. They asked if I was seeing someone. I said no, because what I had with her wasn't dating. It wasn't love. It wasn't anything that could be softened with language. It was worship, devotion, control, and I gave it freely, even when I knew it might cost me everything. The envelope arrived without a stamp, without a sender, slid under my apartment door sometime during the night. The paper was thick, heavy, the kind that held ink like blood. My name was written in black across the front, just my first name, in the same crisp handwriting I had come to associate with the way she touched me, deliberate, elegant, final. I knew better than to hesitate. I opened it with shaking fingers and found a single folded document inside. No note, no explanation, just the weight of what it meant pressed between my hands. Inside was a contract. It was written in sharp legal language, but the intent behind it pulsed through the cold wording like a heartbeat. Confidentiality, exclusivity, consent, boundaries defined only by her discretion. The terms were specific and vague all at once, covering physical, emotional, and behavioral expectations. I was to be available to her on request. I was to refrain from intimacy with anyone else. I was to surrender control in private spaces, maintain appearances in public, and never speak of her. My role was unnamed but absolute. At the bottom, a blank line waited for my signature. Next to it, hers was already written. A name I knew wasn't real, but that didn't matter. She was more real to me than anyone else. For hours, I stared at it. Every rational part of me screamed to tear it apart, to run, to end this before I lost any more of myself. But those parts felt distant now, quiet. What echoed loudest was the memory of her hands, her voice, the mirrored rooms, the way my body responded to her touch like it had never belonged to me at all. And the truth sat heavy in my chest. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want out. I wanted more. So I signed. I left the envelope at the place she had marked with a tiny inked X in the corner, an unassuming drop box in the back hallway of a florist's shop that reeked of old water and fading roses. The next day, a black box appeared on my bed. Inside was a dress. Black lace, sheer in places that mattered, delicate enough to feel forbidden. Beneath it, a note in that same unmistakable script. One sentence. Wear this tonight. No time, no location, and yet I understood exactly what to do. That night, the car arrived without sound. I stepped into the back seat wearing the dress. No bra, no underwear, just perfume on my collarbone and a thin gold bracelet that had once belonged to my mother. The ride was silent. The windows were tinted black, the driver unseen. My pulse thundered in my ears. I kept my legs crossed, my hands folded neatly in my lap like a child preparing for punishment or praise. The building we pulled up to was unfamiliar, modern, tall, faceless. The elevator swallowed me whole, carrying me up and up into silence. When the doors opened, she was waiting, not in lingerie, not in dominance, just standing by the window in a long, dark gown, glass of something amber in her hand, her gaze already on me before I stepped out. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't speak. She only held out her hand. I walked to her, slowly, deliberately, and placed mine in hers. She led me through the apartment like a guide through a cathedral, careful, quiet, reverent. Every wall was white, every surface clean, minimal, cold. But the air was thick with tension, with waiting. When we entered the back room, I saw it. A table, long, low, covered in velvet. Beside it, a narrow shelf lined with objects, implements, accessories, tools of control, of transformation, silk ties, leather cuffs, a blindfold, a paddle, a small polished box I didn't recognize. She let go of my hand and motioned for me to stand by the table. I did. She undressed me without words. The lace slid from my shoulders like falling leaves. She moved around me like she was sketching, mapping, measuring. Her hands didn't linger. They commanded. When I was bare, she guided me down onto the velvet. My skin sank into it, the texture cool and lush against my spine. She strapped my wrists, not tightly, but enough to remind me. My ankles followed. I didn't resist. I never had. From the shelf, she took the box, opened it slowly. Inside, a small tattooing needle. Silent. I froze. She looked at me, head tilted, and waited. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. I nodded once. A single breath, barely audible. She moved closer. She inked a symbol onto the inside of my thigh. Tiny, elegant, not a word, not a name, just a mark. I winced at first, then melted into the burn, into the sting of permanence. Her free hand rested on my stomach, steadying me. She was calm, methodical, and when she finished, she pressed her lips to the fresh mark as if sealing it. She didn't untie me immediately. Instead, she traced her fingertips over my body like she was memorizing the terrain. My skin responded like it had been waiting. Every nerve woke. Her mouth followed the path of her fingers, and soon I was arching into her without moving, moaning without sound, unraveling without thought. My hands gripped nothing. My thighs trembled. She brought me to the edge over and over without letting me fall. I cried out once, sharp and raw, and she smiled, not cruelly, not kindly, just satisfied. When she finally let me come, it was with her hand pressed over my mouth, her eyes boring into mine, her body pressed against my side like a brand. I shattered beneath her like glass under pressure. She watched it all. Afterward, she unstrapped me, dressed me slowly, kissed my marked skin one final time. She handed me a mirror to see it. I stared at the symbol. Small, crimson, permanent. Later, alone in my apartment, I traced the edges of it with trembling fingers. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't ask, but I belonged to it now, to her. It began with the mask, black velvet, soft against my skin, tied behind my head by her own fingers. I felt the knot tighten, her breath warm against my neck. The world dimmed, narrowed, became sound and heat and texture. She said nothing. She never needed to. I was learning to understand her language, a silent choreography of dominance and ritual. When I turned to face her, I was no longer someone. I was something, a figure shaped by her desire, molded to be displayed. She led me down a hallway I didn't recognize. The air was cooler, smelled faintly of incense and wax. My heels echoed differently on the floor, concrete, not tile. The sounds around us shifted, no longer silence, but murmurs, distant voices, laughter, the clink of glass against glass. My heart pounded in rhythm with my footsteps. My skin prickled beneath the thin silk of the gown she had chosen for me, transparent in all the wrong places, sheer in every right one. No underwear, no jewelry, just the mark she had given me, still tender on the inside of my thigh, and the tightness of the mask around my eyes. When the door opened, sound rushed in like a wave. Music low and pulsing, the scent of perfume and sweat, the hum of attention focused inward. She took my hand and guided me forward, her pace unhurried, her grip firm. I stepped into the space and felt the shift immediately. Eyes, dozens, maybe more, watching, measuring, wanting. I couldn't see them, but I felt them on my skin like heat lamps. She brought me to the center. The platform was cold under my feet, elevated only slightly but enough to expose. Lights above, angled mirrors catching fragments of me from all directions. I stood still, heart racing, hands at my sides. The music dipped lower. A new kind of silence spread, expectant, charged. I was alone now. She had stepped away. I could no longer feel her touch, but she was there, somewhere, watching. Calm, amused, male, announcing me like an offering. I didn't catch the words. I didn't need to. I knew what I had become. The fabric was pulled from my shoulders by someone unseen. It slid down my body like water, pooling at my feet. I stood naked under the lights. The mask was all that remained. I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with nudity. It was the kind of exposure that reached under the skin, that peeled back the self and left only sensation. Hands approached, plural. They didn't rush, they didn't grope, they explored. Fingers tracing the outline of my spine. A palm gliding across my stomach. Fingertips ghosting along the curve of my breast. No one spoke, no one asked. Consent had already been surrendered, written in ink, sealed with breath. I was no longer participant. I was performance. The touches multiplied, each more deliberate than the last. A hand cupping my chin, tilting my head. Another brushing the backs of my knees, testing for tension. I tried to remain still, to be what they wanted, but my body betrayed me, shivering, clenching, trembling with every new contact. I felt them circling, like wolves assessing prey, or priests admiring an altar. One mouth found my neck, kissed it lightly. Another set of hands pulled my legs apart gently, one guiding me to kneel. My knees hit the platform with a soft thud. I remained upright, chest forward, arms behind. I didn't know who touched me. I stopped trying to care. My body responded because it was trained to now, trained by her, sculpted by her, built for this. Soft restraints looped around my wrists. Fingers slid between my thighs. A mouth tasted my skin. Laughter, low and private, rippled through the room. Someone kissed the mark she had given me, their tongue pressing into the edge of it. The pain mixed with pleasure until I could no longer distinguish one from the other. The platform shifted with movement, a body behind me, then another in front, warmth against my lips, wetness between my legs. I was opened and filled in ways I couldn't track. Everything was fragmented: touch, breath, sound, climax, repeat. Time lost meaning. My body was taken and given, displayed and devoured. Every gasp was echoed in the dark. Every cry was witnessed. Every part of me was shared. I didn't know who they were, only that I was theirs for that moment. And through it all, I imagined her standing still in the corner, arms crossed, watching without blinking. My creator, my collector, the only one whose approval mattered. When it ended, I was lifted, dressed, cleaned, moved. I didn't walk, I was carried. I floated between hands like something sacred, exhausted, used, worshipped. She received me in silence, back in the room where it had begun. No words, just a towel, a bath already drawn, water warm, bubbles thick. She lowered me into it slowly, cupping the back of my head as if I might break. She washed me with her own hands, her touch soft again, tender, intimate in a way the others hadn't been, not because of gentleness, but because it meant ownership. Later, in bed, she laid beside me, still dressed, stroking my arm. I was half asleep, my body humming with the ghost of hands, of mouths, of eyes I never saw. She pressed her lips to my temple and whispered something I didn't understand, but it stayed with me long after my eyes closed, because that night I was no longer just hers, I was theirs, and I didn't know if I would ever be just mine again. The boutique was quiet when I arrived, too quiet. The kind of silence that doesn't just exist, but waits. It had rained earlier, and the window still wore streaks of water, distorting the world outside into a haze of color and light. My heels echoed on the floor as I stepped inside, the familiar chime above the door oddly muffled. Everything looked the same. Mannequins dressed in silk, shoes aligned like soldiers, perfume still clinging to the air. But she wasn't there, and I knew, before I even turned the corner to the back office, that she wouldn't be. There was no message, no note, no number to call, just a box, square and black, placed neatly on the counter where she had once leaned and watched me with half-lidded eyes and unreadable intent. I hesitated before touching it. Part of me hoped it would vanish if I looked away. But I reached out anyway, fingers brushing the matte surface. It wasn't locked. It wasn't even sealed. The lid lifted easily, like a breath being exhaled. Inside, nestled among folds of dark tissue paper, was the dress, the first one, the silk that had wrapped around my body like a secret, the one she had chosen with her eyes before I ever dared imagine what she would do to me. It looked untouched, but I knew it wasn't. My skin remembered too much. Beneath the dress, an envelope. I stared at it for a long time. It had weight, not physical, something denser, final. I opened it slowly, hands trembling despite the stillness of the room. Inside was a check, folded once, crisp and clean. The sum was obscene. Enough to cover months of rent, more than I made in a season. My name was written in the top corner, her signature at the bottom, not the one I had seen on the contract, but another, sharper, colder, more deliberate, a name that belonged to someone I had never met, someone I had only embodied. There was nothing else, no message, no explanation, no instructions, just payment, a transaction closing itself. I felt my stomach twist, not with betrayal, but with confirmation. Whatever we had, whatever I had let grow inside me like ivy wrapping a ruin, was over, or had never truly begun. I carried the box home in silence, my grip white-knuckled around the handles. The air outside felt colder now, less forgiving. The city moved around me, unaware, uncaring. People passed, lights changed, horns blared in the distance, and I walked through it all like I had emerged from a different planet entirely. At home, everything was still. Too still. My apartment smelled like linen and dust, untouched for days. I placed the box on the bed and sat beside it. The dress gleamed faintly in the low light, its hem curling like a smirk. I picked it up and pressed it to my face, searching for the scent of her. But it had faded. All that remained was the memory of heat, of breath, of pressure against my skin. I undressed and stood in front of the mirror, holding the fabric against my body. It slid down me like it had the first time, clinging to my curves, reminding me of hands that no longer reached. I turned to see the mark on my thigh. It had begun to fade. The ink, once so sharp, now slightly blurred. Still visible, still hers, but already becoming mine again. I looked at myself. Really looked, at the woman staring back, naked beneath silk, eyes rimmed with exhaustion and something darker, something bruised but not broken. I tried to remember who I had been before her, before the mirrored rooms, the silk restraints, the masked faces and wordless orders. But that girl was distant now, a blur like city lights and rain. I lay down wearing the dress. The sheets were cool against my back. I reached for the check, still folded on the nightstand, and held it over my chest. It felt like a weight, not financial, existential, proof that I had been a thing, an experience, a transaction completed. The next morning, I tried to go to work. I put on makeup, combed my hair, stepped outside, but halfway down the block, I turned back. I didn't know what I was walking toward anymore. The boutique would be there, the clothes, the lights, but not her, never her. That night, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the dress in my lap and the check torn into tiny pieces around me like black confetti. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I didn't know how to grieve something that had never belonged to me, something that had never promised to stay. A week passed, then two. Life resumed in fragments. People asked if I was okay. I lied. I smiled. I said I'd just been tired. One afternoon, I found myself walking past a gallery I had never noticed before. In the window, a photograph caught my eye. A woman, bound in silk, kneeling, her face turned away, body bare. The image was black and white, grainy, intimate. I froze. It was me. No doubt, no possibility of mistake. It was a moment I remembered. The curve of my back, the mark on my thigh, the tension in my fingers, the angle of surrender. There was no name on the plaque, no title, no artist listed. I stood there for a long time, watching strangers stop and stare at the version of me they didn't know, admiring, judging, wondering. I felt something break inside me, not pain, not anger, something more perverse, more hollow. And then, without thinking, I smiled, because maybe that was all I had ever been to her. A work of art, a beautiful thing, a final check, a perfect goodbye.